Within these walls lies a mystical city, an ancient promise of peace, so desired that man has warred over it for thousands of years. Over the centuries, its walls have been reddened by the blood of Jebusites and Jews, Babylonians and Persians, armies of Arabs, Crusaders, Ottoman Turks, and the British Empire. Sacred city of the soul for 1/3 of the Earth's people, through the millennia it has drawn mankind to itself like a magnet. To all who live, work, and visit here, this is more than a city. It is a haven, the fulfillment of some dream or prophecy, the legacy of generations who have gone before. For this man and his family, coming here was the consummation of a promise made 2,000 years ago. This man came here as an orphaned boy and found a miniature version of his lost nation.
What messages, what letters?
The dark shadow of Hitler's armies advancing across Europe drove this man on a path that led to the discovery of his roots in the very earth beneath his home. The magnetism of the city's holy places is so strong that this man risked losing his own family to come here. Proud inheritor of a name that has lived in this city for 1,300 years, this man's life bridges past and future. From near and far they have come, searching for refuge for their pasts and the meaning of the present.
Jerusalem.
3,000 years of vibrant history, hope, and belief are rooted here, within the walls of Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Within these walls, in the tiny enclave that is the Old City, some of the greatest dramas in the history of mankind have been enacted. This is a story of that city, crucible of the world's 3 great monotheistic religions, symbol of peace in an area of turmoil and upheaval. It is a story of peoples of profoundly different cultures who struggle to maintain those differences, people who have fought each other, but now live side by side in sometimes uneasy coexistence. Jews from around the world pray at the Western Wall, vestige of the Second Temple, object of Jewish yearning and prayer for 2,000 years. Here, built on the sites where tradition says Jesus spent his last moments on earth, was crucified and entombed, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Most holy of shrines in the Christian world, this church has attracted pilgrims since the time of Constantine the Great. Within the walls of their ancient quarter, Armenians strive to preserve the heritage of a vanished kingdom. In their lives, and in the hearts and minds of their younger generations. Consecrated under this dome is the sacred rock, where tradition says Abraham prepared to sacrifice Isaac, over which the ancient temples of the Jews were built, from which Muslims proclaim Muhammad journeyed to heaven. This tumult of people and history intersects in the labyrinth of the ancient bazaars. Wrapped around the venerable city like the setting for an exotic jewel are the walls, retaining traces of the eras of King Herod, the Romans, and Crusaders, last rebuilt by Suleiman the Magnificent 400 years ago. Outside the walls, there is the 20th century, the new city of Jerusalem, and the administrative center of the nation of Israel. Inside is a city believed by medieval man to be the center of the universe, a city known to more people for a longer time than any other on earth. Here, the heart of historic Jerusalem still beats. Its ethnic religious quarters cling to the sites that give them life. The Dome of the Rock, third holiest place of Islamic pilgrimage after Mecca and Medina, and focal point of the Muslim quarter. The Western Wall, known as the Wailing Wall, symbol of the Jewish quarter. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, core of the Christian quarter that has grown around it. The Cathedral of St. James, spiritual center of the Armenian quarter. 26,000 souls make their home in the old city, packed into an area of less than 1 square mile. Their story began 3,000 years ago, when King David bought the threshing floor on this hill as the site for the temple of the Jews' one God. Having subdued the Jebusites, he transformed their city into the capital of the United Kingdom of Israel and thrust Jerusalem center stage in a drama that continues to this day. Once a royal center of impressive structures and massive fortifications, the city of David has begun to reveal its past to history. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. A half-century later, the Persians defeated the Babylonians and allowed the Jews to return. The second temple rose on the site of the first. This model depicts Jerusalem as it was when Jesus came here to celebrate the festival of Passover. Although he knew the repressive Roman rulers had labeled him a rebel, he continued to preach brotherhood, kindness, and charity. In the last days before his crucifixion, Jesus left the temple by these steps. They are one of the few remnants that remain, for in 70 AD, on the anniversary of the day the Babylonians had sacked the first temple, the Romans burned the city, butchered the people, and took the rest as slaves. Thus was Jerusalem destroyed for a second time. "600 years later, according to Muslim belief, Muhammad departed for the throne of God from the sacred rock of Jerusalem, where the temple had stood. Aware of the holy books of the Jews and Christians, Muhammad had converted the idolatrous tribes of Arabia to the concept of one God. Only 6 years after his death, an army of his followers stood at Jerusalem's gates, claiming the city as their own. Muslims were to rule Jerusalem for the next 1,300 years, except for 2 interruptions when the Crusaders wrested the city from them. In the 20th century, the flame of war again flared in the Holy Land. World War I, the British march into Palestine to fight the Ottoman Turks. As it has some 20 times in its recorded history, in 1917, Jerusalem falls. The holy city is surrendered to the British. Mindful that Jesus had walked into Jerusalem, General Sir Edmund Allenby humbly enters Jaffa Gate on foot. There are renewed stirrings of Zionism, the concept of a modern Jewish nation. In 1947, the United Nations votes to end the British mandate and partition Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, citing the fulfillment of the dream of generations, makes a proclamation Jews everywhere have long awaited. The state of Israel has arisen. The next day, 6 neighboring Arab countries invade, determined to crush the infant nation before it is born. With Jerusalem under siege and the Jewish quarter ready to fall, the holy books are removed. Jerusalem is a divided city. For 19 years, the old city will be ruled by Jordan. In 1967, as the Six-Day War rages, Israeli paratroopers storm through St. Stephen's Gate. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan arrives at the Western Wall, in Jewish hands again for the first time in 2,000 years. According to ancient custom, General Dayan writes a prayer to place in the wall. May peace come to the Jewish people. Today, a fragile peace reigns in the walled city. The Supreme Muslim Council has remained in charge of the Dome of the Rock. The Israelis reclaimed the Western Wall, cherished relic of their lost temple. Jews from more than 100 cultural backgrounds have come to live in their ancient capital. Many are Ashkenazi, from Europe and the Americas. The rest, Sephardic and Oriental Jews, are from Mediterranean regions, the Middle and Far East. When the Jewish community in Yemen heard of the establishment of Israel, Yosef Zadok and his family decided to emigrate immediately. For them, the biblical prophecy of the return to Zion. Ironically, it was a Roman emperor, Constantine the Great, who adopted Christianity as the faith of his realm and assured the future of the religion. His mother, the Empress Helena, journeyed here 3 centuries after Christ's death. Over the sites where she believed Jesus had been crucified and buried, Constantine erected the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Today, the church is shared by 6 Christian sects: Greek, Armenian, Ethiopian and Syrian Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Coptic. The Copts have a tiny chapel at the back of Christ's tomb. The front chapel belongs to the Greek Orthodox. Among their holdings is the stone where Jesus is thought to have lain when he was taken from the cross. Over the rock of Calvary, where Jesus was crucified, the Greek Orthodox maintain a chapel. Deep in the church, near the base of the Rock of Calvary, is an Armenian Orthodox chapel dedicated to St. Helena. Medieval pilgrims etched tiny crosses in the walls, leading to the place where Helena found what she thought was the true cross. Painted on the bedrock is a ship with the Latin inscription, "O Lord, we arrived." It indicates that long before this church was built, pilgrims journeyed here, believing this to be the site of the crucifixion. A mud hut village atop the roof of the church is the only area which the Ethiopian Orthodox, one of the oldest Christian communities in the Holy Land, can claim. Control of even this modest outpost is disputed in legal wrangles that began in Ottoman times. Intense rivalries between sects have long raged over rights to this most sacred of Christian shrines. Because of these rivalries, centuries ago, the key to the church was entrusted to two Muslim families, one to keep the key, the other to lock and unlock the door. Each night, a member of the Nusebe family still locks the church as they have for 400 years. Sequestered behind a huge gate that is unlocked each morning and locked again each night, the Armenian quarter has existed for nearly 1,000 years. Life within still centers around the 12th century Cathedral of St. James. A reminder of the days when the Muslim rulers forbade the ringing of church bells. The striking of this plank announces services. Today, the community gathers to commemorate a Holocaust. For the Armenians are a people whose ancient homeland has been ravaged, many of its citizens killed or scattered. To Elia Kavajian, the service has special meaning, for he is a survivor of the Holocaust. For him, Jerusalem became a haven. 60 years ago, he arrived as an orphaned boy. Now, he is surrounded by his loving family. Survivors lead the solemn procession to the Armenian cemetery. They are living reminders of 1,500,000 who perished. In 1915, part of what had once been the Armenian Christian kingdom was under Ottoman rule. Labeling the Armenians infidels and a dangerous foreign element, the government began to kill their intellectuals. Life had little value, as this magazine caption illustrates. $5 buys a pretty Armenian slave girl. Describing their policy as the displacement of the Armenian population, the Ottoman Turks drove them on forced marches into the Syrian desert. The road was the path of death by disease, massacre, and starvation. Elia Kavajian remembers.
They took us through the Syrian desert to Mardin. We walked, I don't know how many weeks, how many months walked. Near Mardin, they bring it a place which all around it is many hills. My mother Says, my darling, they are going to kill us. I want to give my son to that Kurd which is coming. Maybe he will remain alive.
The Kurdish family fed him, cleaned him up, and sold him at an auction to a Syrian Christian family. The husband was an ironsmith, and 6-year-old Elia worked the bellows for him. When the man remarried, young Elia was put on the streets. He drifted, begging, for a year, until the American Near East Relief Organization placed him in an orphanage and eventually brought him to Jerusalem. A son and daughter and their families gather today to remember the victims and rejoice in Elia's survival.